I'm Erica Marshall, 29, and literally last weekend, my rep as the family's peacekeeper? Yeah, it totally backfired. The wedding I'd poured my heart into planning, the one day that was supposed to be mine, it blew up into a full-on family meltdown at the Grand Willow venue. My sister Valentina, the queen of stealing the spotlight, demanded I let her have her moment on my wedding day. And when I pushed back, the room went dead silent. "You're so selfish, Erica," she shrieked, with every guest staring like deer in headlights. But here's the tea. Her tantrum didn't break me. It lit a spark. I'm not just pushing back. I'm about to flip the script and change everything. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and stay with me for the most satisfying takedown you'll ever hear. Looking back, it's almost unreal what I did once that final straw snapped. I woke up that morning feeling like I'd already run a marathon. My stomach was a knot of nerves, but not the cute, bride-to-be kind. It was the kind that comes from knowing Valentina was going to be there, probably scheming something to make my day about her. I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel suite, smoothing the lace on my dress, the one I'd spent months agonizing over. It was simple, elegant, with a fitted bodice and a soft flowing train, nothing like the gaudy, over-the-top stuff Valentina would have picked. My fiancé David poked his head in, his tie half-knotted, grinning like he always did when he saw me. "You look like a dream," he said, and I swear, his voice was the only thing keeping me grounded. I smiled back, but my hands were trembling as I adjusted my veil. "You sure you're ready for my family?" I asked, half-joking. He laughed, but his eyes softened. "I'm ready for you," he said, and kissed my forehead. That moment felt like a promise, one I clung to as the day started to unravel. The Grand Willow venue was perfect, or at least it was supposed to be. Fairy lights twinkled in the garden, white roses lined the aisle, and the air smelled like lavender and fresh-cut grass. I'd spent months planning every detail, from the handwritten place cards to the playlist that mixed my indie favorites with David's classic rock. It was our day, a celebration of the life we were building together. But as I walked down the aisle, my arm looped through Dad's, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My family was seated in the front row, Mom, Dad, and Valentina, her face half hidden behind a wide-brimmed hat like she was auditioning for a movie. I caught her eye, and she gave me that smile, the one that never reached her eyes. It was the same smile she'd used my whole life, the one that said, "I'm about to make this about me." The ceremony went off without a hitch, thank God. David's vows made me cry, and I stumbled through mine, laughing through tears as I promised to love him even when he left dishes in the sink. The guests clapped, a few people whistled, and for a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, Valentina would behave. We moved to the reception, a big open tent with wooden tables and candles flickering in glass jars. I was sipping champagne, my hand in David's, when I saw her. Valentina, weaving through the crowd, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. She was wearing a floor-length white gown, white, on my wedding day. My best friend Sarah leaned over and whispered, "Is she serious?" I could feel every eye in the room darting between us, the bride in her ivory dress and the sister who decided to play bride too. I clenched my glass so tight I thought it might shatter. David squeezed my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "Ignore her," he murmured. "This is our day." I nodded, but my chest was tight, like I couldn't get enough air. I'd spent my whole life ignoring Valentina's stunts, her fake tears at my high school graduation, her emergency calls during my college finals, her knack for turning every family gathering into the Valentina show. But this was my wedding, my one day. And she was standing there, soaking up the attention, smiling like she'd planned it all along. I forced a smile, waving at a cousin who was taking photos. But inside, I was screaming. I didn't know then that this was just the beginning, that Valentina was about to push me so far, I'd finally snap. The reception rolled on, and I tried to focus on the good stuff, the way David's mom hugged me, the way my coworkers danced like nobody was watching. But every time I turned around, there was Valentina, laughing too loud, posing for pictures, her white dress catching the light. Guests were whispering, some bold enough to ask me, "Why's she wearing that?" I just shrugged, my jaw tight, and said, "That's just Valentina." But it wasn't just Valentina. It was years of her stealing my moments, of me biting my tongue to keep the peace. I glanced at David, who was chatting with his groomsmen, and I thought about how he'd always believed in me, how he'd seen the real me when my family never did. That's when I felt it, a spark, a tiny ember of courage starting to burn. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew I wasn't going to let her ruin this day. By the time the toast started, I was a live wire, every nerve buzzing. Dad gave a speech that was mostly about him, and David's brother told a funny story about our first date. Then Valentina stood up, glass in hand, and I swear the room tilted. She cleared her throat, her eyes glinting with that familiar mix of charm and malice. "I have something to say," she announced, and every head turned. My heart sank. I knew that tone. I'd heard it 1,000 times, when she forgot to invite me to her birthday party, when she accidentally spilled wine on my prom dress. Whatever was coming, it wasn't going to be good. And I was right. But what I didn't know was that her next move would push me past my breaking point, and that I'd be ready to push back. Valentina's voice still echoed in my head as I stood there, clutching my champagne glass, the reception buzzing around me. Her white dress was like a spotlight, pulling every eye away from me, the bride, and I could feel the familiar weight of being invisible settling over me. It wasn't new. My whole life, I'd been the shadow to Valentina's son, the quiet sister who faded into the background while she soaked up the applause. Growing up, I'd learned to live with it, but that didn't mean it didn't hurt. As I watched her work the room, laughing with my cousins, I couldn't help but slip into memories of all the times I'd been erased by her theatrics. I was 10 when it started to sink in. We were at my elementary school talent show and I'd spent weeks practicing a piano piece, my fingers aching from hours at the keys. It was a big deal for me, shy, bookish Erica stepping onto a stage for the first time. I played every note perfectly, my heart pounding as the audience clapped. But when I stepped off, beaming, Mom and Dad were already fussing over Valentina, who'd spontaneously decided to sing a song she'd barely rehearsed. Her voice was shaky, but they acted like she was a pop star. "You're a natural," Mom gushed, while Dad handed her a bouquet of roses they'd bought for her. I stood there holding my participation ribbon, my smile fading. "Good job, Erica," Dad said, barely looking at me. That was the first time I felt it, the sting of being overlooked. It kept happening. In high school, I worked my butt off to get straight A's, even landing a scholarship to a state university. The night I got the acceptance letter, I ran downstairs, waving it like a flag. "Mom, Dad, I did it," I said, my voice shaking with excitement. But they were too busy cheering for Valentina, who'd just landed a minor role in a community theater play. "Our little star," Dad said, hugging her. Mom framed her playbill while my scholarship letter sat on the kitchen counter, eventually buried under junk mail. I remember staring at it, my chest tight, wondering why my wins never mattered as much. The worst was my college graduation. I'd graduated with honors, one of the top in my class, and I'd invited my family to the ceremony, hoping they'd finally see me. I stood on that stage, my cap slightly crooked, grinning as I accepted my diploma. But when I looked out at the crowd, I saw Valentina fake crying, loudly telling everyone nearby that she was so emotional because she'd just booked a modeling gig. People turned to comfort her, not to cheer for me. Mom and Dad didn't even notice when I walked off the stage. They were too busy taking selfies with her. I went back to my dorm that night and cried, not because I needed their praise, but because I wanted them to see me for once. Valentina had a knack for turning every moment into her stage. Birthdays, holidays, even quiet family dinners, she'd find a way to make it about her. Once at Thanksgiving, I tried to share that I'd gotten a promotion at my marketing job, a small firm where I was finally making a name for myself. I started to speak, my voice soft but proud. "That's nice, Erica," Mom said, cutting me off. Then Valentina launched into a story about a crisis. At her job, she'd spilled coffee on a client's shirt and somehow spun it into a tale of her heroism. Everyone laughed, and my moment was gone. I poked at my mashed potatoes, my throat tight, wondering if I'd ever stop feeling like a ghost in my own family. It wasn't just that they ignored me, it was how they celebrated her for things that weren't even real. Valentina had a way of bending the truth, making herself the victim or the hero, whichever got her more attention. She'd lie about her grades, her jobs, even her relationships, and Mom and Dad ate it up. I'd watch, silent, as she spun stories about almost signing with a big modeling agency or nearly landing a movie role. Nobody questioned her. Nobody noticed me quietly building my life, my degree, my job, my relationship with David. They didn't see the nights I stayed up late working on campaigns or the mornings I spent running with David, laughing about our future. To them, I was just Erica, the boring one, the one who didn't make waves. Now at my wedding, those memories crashed over me like a wave. I stood there watching Valentina glide through the crowd in her white dress, her laughter cutting through the music. Guests were whispering, some smirking, others confused, but nobody said anything to her. Why would they? She was Valentina, the star, the one who always got away with it. My hands shook as I set down my glass, the bubbles fizzing against the rim. David caught my eye from across the room, his brow furrowing like he could sense the storm inside me. I forced a smile, but my mind was racing, replaying every moment I'd let her steal. I thought about how I'd always swallowed my anger, kept the peace, played the good sister. But this wasn't a talent show or a family dinner. This was my wedding. And as Valentina raised her glass for her toast, her eyes locking onto mine with that smug little smile, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't going to let her take this moment, not this time. Valentina's glass was still raised, her smile sharp as a blade, and the reception tent felt like it was closing in around me. The chatter of guests faded into a dull hum, and all I could see was her, standing there like she owned the place, ready to hijack my wedding with whatever she was about to say. My hands were clammy, my heart thudding so loud I thought everyone could hear it. But as I stood there, frozen, a memory hit me. A moment from a few years ago that changed everything. It was the moment I realized I didn't need Valentina's spotlight or my family's approval to shine. It was the moment I started building something for myself, something they couldn't touch. It was a rainy Tuesday night, 3 years ago, and I was alone in my tiny apartment, hunched over my laptop. I'd just come home from a long day at my marketing job, my eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets. My phone buzzed with a text from Valentina, another emergency about some guy who'd broken her heart. I ignored it like I'd started doing more often. I was tired of her drama, tired of being the sister who fixed everything. That night, I wasn't thinking about her. I was thinking about me, about what I wanted. I'd always loved storytelling, crafting campaigns that made people feel something. But at work, I was stuck doing grunt work, tweaking ad copy for clients who didn't care. I wanted more. I wanted to create something that was mine. That's when the idea hit me. I'd been tinkering with a side project. A blog where I wrote about small businesses, their stories, their struggles. It started as a hobby, something to keep me sane. But that night I decided to take it seriously. I stayed up until 3 a.m., sketching out a plan to turn it into a platform, a real brand. I called it Grow Local. A place to spotlight entrepreneurs who were overlooked, just like me. I poured everything into it, every late night, every weekend, every ounce of energy I had left after work. I learned how to code basic web pages, taught myself SEO, and reached out to business owners, my voice shaking as I pitched my idea. Most said no, but a few said yes, and their stories started to gain traction. The first big win came 6 months later. A bakery owner I'd featured went viral after I wrote about her struggle to keep her family's shop open. People flooded her store, and she sent me a tearful email thanking me for saving her business. I sat on my couch, reading her words, my hands trembling. For the first time I felt seen. Not by my family, but by strangers who believed in what I was doing. That's when I knew I was onto something. I kept going, interviewing more owners, posting more stories. Grow Local grew, slowly at first, then faster. I started a podcast, then a newsletter. By the time I met David, I had thousands of followers and brands were reaching out for partnerships. But I kept it quiet. I didn't tell my family. Not mom, not dad, not Valentina. I didn't want their fake praise or their inevitable criticism. This was mine, and I wasn't going to let them taint it. The struggle wasn't just time or energy, it was believing in myself. Every time I hit a milestone like landing my first sponsor, I'd hear Valentina's voice in my head, saying, "You're not special, Erica." I'd see mom's distracted nod or dad's "that's nice" and feel like a fraud. There were nights I wanted to quit when I'd stare at my laptop wondering if I was wasting my time. But then I'd get an email from a reader saying my work inspired them, or a comment thanking me for shining a light on someone's dream. Those messages kept me going. They reminded me that I didn't need Valentina's stage to matter. I was building my own. By the time David proposed, Grow Local was my lifeline. It wasn't just a project anymore, it was my proof that I was enough. David knew everything. He'd stay up with me, brainstorming ideas, celebrating every new milestone. "You're a rock star," he'd say, and I'd laugh, but I was starting to believe it. I didn't tell my family about the blog, the podcast, or the fact that I'd just signed a deal with a major media company to expand Grow Local into a full platform. It was worth thousands, maybe more, and it was set to launch the week after the wedding. I wanted to walk into my new life with David, knowing I'd built something real, something they couldn't take away. But standing there at the reception, watching Valentina preen, I felt that old doubt creeping in. Could I really stand up to her? Could I finally step out of her shadow? Her voice snapped me back to the moment. "I have an announcement," she said, her tone dripping with drama. The guests leaned in, their faces eager, and I felt my stomach twist. I knew what was coming, another Valentina performance, another stolen moment. My fingers tightened around David's hand and he gave me a look, like he was saying, "You've got this." I didn't know if I did, but I was done hiding. I'd spent years building Grow Local in secret, yet proving to myself I was more than the sister who faded away. Now, with Valentina about to hijack my wedding, I felt that spark from 3 years ago flare up again. I wasn't just going to let her win, I was going to fight back. Valentina's words hung in the air, her announcement looming like a storm cloud over the reception, but the moment was paused as the band struck up a new song, giving me a brief reprieve. I stood there, my heart still racing from the memories of building Grow Local, my secret triumph. It was the night before the wedding now, and I was back in the hotel suite, the weight of tomorrow pressing down on me. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the occasional clink of glasses from the bar downstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed, my engagement ring catching the light as I twisted it around my finger. Tomorrow was supposed to be perfect. My day with David, the start of our life together. But Valentina's presence was like a shadow I couldn't shake, and I was bracing myself for whatever chaos she'd bring. I'd spent the day running through final details with the wedding planner, triple-checking the seating chart to keep Valentina away from the head table. David had been a rock, calming me down when I started spiraling about the flowers or the weather. "It's going to be amazing," he'd said, kissing my temple as we left the venue after the rehearsal dinner. But now, alone in the suite, I couldn't stop my mind from racing. I unzipped my garment bag and ran my fingers over the lace of my dress, picturing myself walking down the aisle. For a moment, I let myself imagine it, David's smile, the vows, the dance we'd practiced in our living room. But then I saw Valentina's face in my mind, her smug grin, and my stomach twisted. She'd find a way to ruin it, she always did. I stood up and paced to the window, looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed on the nightstand and I glanced at it. A text from Sarah, my maid of honor. "You okay? Ready for tomorrow?" she wrote, with a heart emoji. I smiled, but my fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Sarah knew about Valentina's history, the way she'd always stolen the spotlight. "As ready as I'll ever be," I typed back, adding a winking emoji to keep it light. But I wasn't okay. I was terrified, not of marrying David, but of what my sister might do to overshadow the one day that was supposed to be mine. I sank into the armchair, my robe slipping off one shoulder, and let my mind wander back to the rehearsal dinner earlier that evening. It had been at a cozy Italian restaurant near the venue, with long tables covered in white linen and candles flickering in the dim light. David's family was there, laughing and toasting, while my parents sat at the other end, already fawning over Valentina. She'd shown up late, of course, in a tight red dress that screamed for attention, her hair swept up like she was walking a red carpet. "Sorry, traffic," she'd said, not sounding sorry at all. Mom had practically leapt up to hug her, while Dad poured her a glass of wine. I'd sat there, picking at my pasta, my jaw tight as I watched her charm everyone. Even David's mom, usually so warm, had raised an eyebrow when Valentina started telling a loud story about her latest modeling gig. David had squeezed my knee under the table, his way of saying, "I see you." I'd leaned into him, grateful for his steady presence. He knew everything. How Valentina had spent our childhood making me feel small, how my parents had always taken her side. "She's not going to ruin this," he'd whispered, his breath warm against my ear. I'd nodded, but deep down I wasn't so sure. I'd spent so long keeping the peace, biting my tongue, letting Valentina have her way. Even when I'd built Grow Local, my secret success, I hadn't told my family, hadn't wanted to risk their judgment. But now, on the eve of my wedding, I felt the weight of all those years pressing down on me. I didn't want to hide anymore. I got up and poured myself a glass of water, my hands shaking slightly. The truth was, I wasn't just worried about Valentina. I was worried about myself, about whether I could handle whatever she threw at me. I'd spent years proving I was strong, building something incredible with Grow Local. But facing her was different. It was personal. I thought about the deal I'd signed last week, the one that would launch Grow Local into a full media platform. It was huge, a validation of everything I'd worked for, but I hadn't told anyone except David and Sarah. Part of me wanted to shout it from the rooftops tomorrow to show my family I wasn't the invisible sister they thought I was. But another part of me just wanted to get through the day without a fight. I set the glass down and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were tired, but there was a spark there, the same one I'd felt when I started Grow Local. I thought about David, waiting for me at the altar tomorrow, and Sarah, who'd promised to have my back. I thought about all the people who'd read my blog, who'd thanked me for telling their stories. They saw me, they believed in me. Maybe it was time I believed in myself too. As I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up, I made a quiet promise. Tomorrow, no matter what Valentina did, I wasn't going to let her steal my light. I didn't know how, but I was going to fight for my day. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally step out of her shadow for good. The reception was in full swing now, the band playing a lively cover while guests mingled under the twinkling lights of the tent. I stood near the head table, my bouquet still clutched in one hand, trying to soak in the moment. David laughing with his groomsmen, Sarah twirling on the dance floor. But then I saw her, Valentina, gliding through the crowd in her floor-length white gown, her smile as sharp as ever. The sight hit me like a punch to the chest. It wasn't just a dress, it was a calculated move, a way to scream, "Look at me on my wedding day." Whispers rippled through the guests, heads turning, eyes darting between us. My jaw tightened, and I felt the familiar sting of her stealing my moment, just like always. This was the gauntlet of contempt I dreaded, and it was only beginning. I forced myself to move, setting my bouquet down on the table, my fingers brushing the soft petals. David caught my eye from across the room, his brow furrowing with concern. I gave him a small nod, trying to signal I was okay, but my stomach was churning. Guests approached me, their smiles tight, their words careful. "You look beautiful, Erica," my cousin Lisa said, her eyes flicking toward Valentina, who was posing for a photo with one of David's uncles. "That dress she's wearing. Wow." The word hung there heavy with judgment. I managed a laugh, but it came out sharp like broken glass. "Yeah, that's Valentina," I said, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. Everywhere I turned, it was the same. My coworker Jenna pulled me aside, her hand on my arm. "Is she serious with that outfit?" she whispered, her eyes wide. I shrugged, my cheeks burning. "She's just being herself." But inside I was screaming. The dress wasn't just a fashion choice, it was a power play, a way to make sure every guest was talking about her instead of me. I could feel their pity, their confusion, and it made my skin crawl. I'd spent months planning this day, picking every detail to reflect David and me, and now it was being hijacked by my sister's need for attention. I tried to focus on the good, David's warm hand in mine earlier, the way he'd whispered, "You're my home," during our first dance. But Valentina was everywhere. Her laughter cutting through the music, her white dress catching the light like a beacon. She was holding court near the bar now, surrounded by a cluster of guests, her hands gesturing wildly as she told some story. I caught snippets, something about a last-minute wardrobe malfunction that forced her to wear the dress. A lie, obviously. I knew her too well. She'd planned this, probably from the moment she got the invitation. My hands clenched at my sides, my nails digging into my palms. I wanted to march over, yank her aside, demand to know why she couldn't let me have this one day. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I moved through the crowd, smiling, thanking people for coming. My Aunt Karen hugged me, her perfume overwhelming. "Such a lovely wedding," she said, then lowered her voice. "Don't let her get to you, sweetheart." I nodded, my throat tight, but her words only made it worse. They all saw it. Valentina's stunt, my humiliation, and they expected me to just take it, like I always had. I glanced at my parents, sitting at their table, beaming at Valentina like she was the bride. Mom was adjusting Valentina's hair, her face glowing with pride, while Dad chuckled at something she said. Neither of them had even looked at me since the ceremony. I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Sarah," her eyes fierce. "You don't deserve this," she said, her voice low. "Want me to spill wine on her or something?" I laughed, a real one this time, and it eased the knot in my chest for a second. "Tempting," I said, "but I'll handle it." She raised an eyebrow, like she didn't quite believe me, but nodded. "I've got your back," she said, squeezing my hand. I held on to that, her loyalty, as I turned back to the crowd. But the weight of Valentina's presence was suffocating. Every smile I forced, every thank you I said felt like a lie. I wasn't okay. I was furious, hurt, and tired of being the sister who let things slide. As I made my way to the head table, a family friend, Mr. Thompson, stopped me. He was an old colleague of Dad's, his face kind but awkward. "Beautiful day, Erica," he said, then hesitated. "Your sister, she's quite the character, isn't she?" I could tell he was trying to be diplomatic, but his words stung. "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. "She's something." He patted my arm and moved on, leaving me standing there, my hands trembling. I looked over at Valentina again, now laughing with a group of my friends, her dress practically glowing under the lights. It was too much. I felt like I was shrinking, disappearing into the background of my own wedding. But deep down, that spark I'd felt when I built Grow Local was still there, flickering. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the Erica they thought I was. And as I watched Valentina bask in the attention, I knew I couldn't let her win this time. Not today. Valentina's announcement hung in the air like a grenade about to detonate, her glass still raised as she commanded the room with that practiced, tearful smile. The band had stopped playing, and every guest in the tent was staring at her, some leaning forward, others whispering. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, my fingers gripping the edge of the head table. I knew this moment was coming. She'd been building up to it all day with her white dress and her loud laughter, but nothing could have prepared me for what she said next. "I'm pregnant," she declared, her voice breaking with fake emotion, and the room erupted in gasps and murmurs. My wedding, my moment, was gone, stolen by her spotlight-grabbing stunt. The words hit me like a slap. I stood there, frozen, my bouquet abandoned on the table, its petals wilting under the heat of my clenched hands. David was beside me, his hand on my lower back, steady as always, but I could feel his tension, the way his fingers tightened against my dress. "Erica," he whispered, his voice low, urgent. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on Valentina, who was now dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, soaking up the attention as guests rushed to congratulate her. My cousin Lisa was already hugging her, squealing, "Oh my God, Val, that's amazing!" Mom was crying, her hands clasped like she was witnessing a miracle, while Dad clapped Valentina on the back, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. I felt like I was underwater, the sounds muffled, the lights too bright. My wedding day, the one I'd dreamed of since David proposed, the one I'd poured my heart into, was slipping through my fingers. I glanced at the tables, at the candles I'd chosen, the place cards I'd handwritten, the playlist I'd spent weeks perfecting. All of it was fading, overshadowed by Valentina's bombshell. Guests were whispering, some stealing glances at me, their expressions a mix of pity and curiosity. "On her sister's wedding day?" I heard someone murmur. My cheeks burned, not with embarrassment but with rage. This wasn't just a stunt. It was a betrayal, a deliberate attempt to erase me from my own story. I forced myself to breathe, my nails digging into my palms. Sarah was at my side now, her eyes blazing. "She's unbelievable," she hissed, her voice barely audible over the crowd's chatter. "You don't have to let this slide." I nodded, but my throat was so tight I couldn't speak. I wanted to scream, to march over and knock that glass out of Valentina's hand, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I watched as she played the part of the glowing mother-to-be, accepting hugs and well wishes like she was the star of the night. My parents were still fawning over her, not even glancing my way. It was like I didn't exist, like I was just a prop in the Valentina show. I thought back to all the times I'd let her get away with this, her fake tears at my graduation, her emergencies that always trumped my milestones. I'd spent my life swallowing my anger, keeping the peace, thinking it made me the bigger person. But standing there, watching her hijack my wedding, I realized it hadn't made me bigger. It had made me smaller, invisible, a shadow of the woman I'd become. I thought about Grow Local, the platform I'd built in secret, the thousands of people who believed in my work. I wasn't the Erica my family saw, the quiet, forgettable sister. I was stronger than that, and I was done letting Valentina define me. She was still talking, her voice carrying over the crowd as she spun some story about how unexpected the pregnancy was, how she just had to share the joy. I caught her eye for a split second, and there it was, that smug little smirk, the one she always used when she knew she'd won. My blood boiled. I could feel David's hand on my back, grounding me, but it wasn't enough to stop the storm building inside. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't let this pass. Not this time. Not on my wedding day. I turned to Sarah, my voice low but steady. She's not getting away with this. Her eyes widened, a spark of excitement flashing across her face. What's the plan? She asked. I didn't have one, not yet, but I could feel that spark from 3 years ago, the one that drove me to build Grow Local, flaring up again. I looked at David, who gave me a small nod, like he knew I was about to do something big. The band started playing again, softly. That and the toasts were supposed to continue. My toast was next. I picked up my glass, my hand steady now, and felt a calm settle over me. Valentina thought she'd stolen the night. She was wrong. I was about to take it back. Valentina's announcement still echoed through the tent, her words like a fog that settled over my wedding, dimming everything I'd worked for. The guests were buzzing, their congratulations swirling around her as she stood there, basking in the attention, her white dress glowing under the fairy lights. My heart was a drumbeat, each thud louder than the last, as I held my champagne glass, my fingers steady despite the storm inside me. David's hand was still on my back, his touch an anchor, but his eyes searched mine like he could sense the shift in me. I wasn't the Erica who'd spent years shrinking to avoid conflict. I was done. Right there in that moment, surrounded by the chaos Valentina had created, I made a decision. I was going to confront her, not in private, not later, but right now, in front of everyone. I was going to take back my day. I took a slow breath, my eyes scanning the room. Sarah was watching me, her expression a mix of worry and anticipation, like she knew something big was coming. My parents were still glued to Valentina, Mom wiping her eyes, Dad chuckling at something she said. The guests were settling back into their seats, the band pausing for the next toast, my toast. I felt the weight of every stare, every whisper, but for the first time, it didn't make me want to disappear. It made me want to stand taller. I'd spent years building Grow Local in secret, proving to myself I was more than the sister who faded away. Now, it was time to prove it to them. I stepped forward, my heels clicking on the wooden floor, and raised my glass. The room quieted, eyes turning to me, some curious, others confused. Valentina's smirk faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered, tilting her head like she was indulging me. I cleared my throat, my voice steady, louder than I expected. I want to thank you all for being here, I started, my eyes sweeping the crowd. This day means everything to David and me. I paused, glancing at David, who gave me a small encouraging nod. My heart was racing, but not with fear, with clarity. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I turned to Valentina, locking eyes with her. Her smile tightened like she sensed something was off. I also want to address something, I said, my voice calm but firm. My sister just shared some big news, and I'm sure you're all thrilled for her. A few guests nodded, but the room was tense, the air thick with anticipation. I took another breath, feeling the spark inside me flare into a flame. But this isn't her day, it's mine, and David's, and I'm done letting her make everything about her. The words hung there sharp and heavy, and the room went dead silent. Valentina's glass lowered slightly, her eyes narrowing. I didn't stop. For years, I've let Valentina steal every moment that mattered to me, I said, my voice steady but raw. My graduation, my achievements, my life, always overshadowed by her lies and her need for attention. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and I saw Mom's hand fly to her chest, Dad's mouth open in shock. Valentina's face flushed, but I kept going. Today was supposed to be different, but she showed up in a white dress, announced a pregnancy during my reception, and once again made it about her. I paused, letting the words sink in. I'm done being invisible. The tent was so quiet I could hear the faint clink of a fork against a plate. Valentina laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. Erica, come on, don't be dramatic, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. But I wasn't backing down. I turned to the crowd, my grip on the glass tightening. You all know her stories, I said. The modeling gigs that never happen, the crises that always seem to outshine everyone else. I've kept quiet, but not anymore. I looked back at her, my voice steady as steel. This ends now, Valentina. I'm not your shadow anymore. David's hand found mine, squeezing gently, and I felt Sarah's presence behind me, like a shield. The guests were frozen, some wide-eyed, others whispering, but I didn't care. I felt lighter, like I'd finally shed the weight of years of silence. Valentina's face was a mask of fury, her lips trembling as she tried to form a response. You're embarrassing yourself, she hissed, but her voice shook and I knew I'd hit a nerve. For the first time, she wasn't in control. I was. I raised my glass higher, my eyes never leaving hers. To David, I said, my voice clear, to our life together, and to never letting anyone dim our light again. The guests hesitated, then a few clapped, the sound growing as David's family and my friends joined in. Valentina stood there, her glass limp in her hand, her spotlight stolen. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. I'd just changed the game. And I wasn't done yet. The applause from my toast still echoed, uneven and hesitant, as the tent buzzed with tension. Valentina stood frozen, her glass half raised, her face a mix of shock and fury, the white dress that had demanded attention now looking like a costume that didn't fit. My heart was still racing, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was exhilaration. I'd called her out, right there in front of everyone, and the room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for what came next. David's hand was in mine, his grip firm, his thumb brushing my knuckles like a silent cheer. Sarah stood behind me, her arms crossed, a fierce grin on her face. I'd started this, and now it was time to finish it. I wasn't just taking back my wedding day, I was dismantling Valentina's carefully crafted facade, piece by piece. I set my glass down, the clink against the table sharp in the quiet. Let's talk about the truth for once, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the murmurs. Valentina's eyes narrowed, her lips parting like she was about to interrupt. But I didn't give her the chance. You've built a life on lies, I said, turning to face her fully. The modeling gigs that never materialized, the big breaks that were always just around the corner. You've had everyone fooled. But not me. Not anymore. The guests shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, others exchanging wide-eyed glances. My parents looked like they'd been slapped, Mom's hands twisting in her lap, Dad's face red with embarrassment. Valentina laughed, but it was brittle, like glass about to shatter. Erica, you're being ridiculous, she said, her voice loud, trying to reclaim control. This is your wedding. Don't ruin it with your jealousy. The word stung, but I didn't flinch. I'd heard it before, her go-to weapon to dismiss me. But this time, it didn't land. I stepped closer, my heels steady on the wooden floor, my eyes locked on hers. Jealousy? I said, my voice calm but sharp. No, Valentina, I'm done feeling small so you can feel big. I turned to the crowd, my hands steady now. Let me tell you about the real Valentina, I said. The sister who forgot to invite me to her birthday party because she didn't want me stealing her spotlight. The sister who spilled wine on my prom dress and called it an accident. The sister who faked tears at my graduation to make it about her. Gasps rippled through the room, and I saw my cousin Lisa's mouth drop open, her eyes flicking to Valentina. I kept going, my voice rising. And today, she shows up to my wedding in a white dress and announces a pregnancy during my reception. That's not a coincidence. That's who she is. Valentina's face was scarlet now, her hands trembling as she clutched her glass. You're lying, she snapped. but her voice cracked and I could see the panic in her eyes. The crowd was with me now, their murmurs turning to whispers of agreement. I felt David's hand on my shoulder, steadying me, and I pressed on. "You've lied about everything," I said. "Your modeling career? I called the agency you said you signed with. They'd never heard of you." A collective gasp went up and Valentina's eyes widened, her composure crumbling. "Your big movie role? I checked. It was an unpaid extra part you exaggerated to impress everyone." The room was electric, every guest hanging on my words. Mom stood up, her voice shaky. "Erica, stop this," she said, but I shook my head. "No, Mom," I said, my voice softer but firm. "You and Dad enabled this. You let her lie, let her overshadow me, because it was easier than dealing with her tantrums." Dad's face fell, his hands gripping the table, but he didn't say a word. I turned back to Valentina, who was glaring at me, tears welling in her eyes. Real ones this time, not the fake ones she'd mastered. "You don't get to do this anymore," I said. "Not to me, not today." I took a step back, my shoulders relaxing. The weight of years of silence lifted. "This is my wedding," I said, addressing the crowd now, "and I'm done letting anyone steal it." I raised my glass again, my hand steady, to David, to love, and to living in the truth. The applause was louder this time, led by David's family and my friends, Sarah cheering the loudest. Valentina stood there, isolated, her dress no longer a beacon but a spotlight on her shame. She turned and stormed out of the tent, her heels clacking, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. I looked at David, his eyes shining with pride, and I felt lighter than I ever had. The room was chaotic, guests whispering, some clapping, others shaking their heads. But I didn't care. I'd exposed her, not out of spite, but to reclaim my voice. I'd spent years building Grow Local in secret, proving my worth to myself. Now, I'd proven it to everyone else. As the band started up again, I squeezed David's hand, ready to dance, ready to start our life, on my terms. The tent was still buzzing with the aftermath of my toast, the air thick with whispers and the clink of glasses as guests tried to process what had just happened. Valentina was gone, her dramatic exit leaving a void that felt both chaotic and liberating. I stood at the head table, my hand still in David's, his steady warmth pulling me back to the moment. The band had started playing again, a soft melody that urged people back to the dance floor, but I could feel the eyes on me. Some shocked, some admiring, others just curious. For the first time in my life, I didn't shrink under those stares. I'd taken back my wedding, my voice, and it felt like I'd finally stepped into the light. As the crowd began to disperse, I slipped away with David and Sarah to a quiet corner of the venue, craving a moment with the people who truly saw me. We stepped out into the garden, where the fairy lights cast a warm glow over the roses, and the night air felt cool against my skin. David wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close, his breath tickling my ear. "You were incredible," he said, his voice low and proud. I leaned into him, my head resting against his shoulder, and felt the tension in my body start to melt. Sarah was pacing a few steps away, her heels sinking slightly into the grass, her grin wide enough to light up the night. "Erica, that was epic," she said, throwing her hands up. "You just slayed a dragon in a white dress." I laughed, a real, full laugh that felt like it came from some deep, untapped place inside me. We sat on a wooden bench under a willow tree, the music from the tent drifting faintly toward us. David's hand found mine, his fingers lacing through my own, and Sarah plopped down beside me, kicking off her heels. "Okay, but seriously," she said, her voice softening. "Are you okay?" I looked at her, then at David, their faces so full of care, and I realized how different this felt from the family I'd grown up with. My parents, still inside, hadn't come to check on me. They were probably consoling Valentina, smoothing over her embarrassment like they always did. But here, with David and Sarah, I felt seen, not as the quiet sister or the peacekeeper, but as Erica, strong, whole, enough. I took a deep breath, the scent of lavender filling my lungs. "I'm more than okay," I said, my voice steady. "I feel free." David squeezed my hand, his eyes crinkling with that smile I loved. "You were always free," he said. "You just showed everyone else." I smiled, my chest warm, but there was still a small ache, a lingering hurt from years of being invisible to my family. I thought about Mom's shocked face during my toast, Dad's silence, the way they'd let Valentina's lies define our family for so long. It hurt. But it didn't break me. Not anymore. Sarah leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. You know what's wild? She said. The way you stood up there and just owned it. I've never seen Valentina look so small. I laughed again, picturing my sister's face, the way her smirk had crumbled. I didn't plan it, I admitted, my fingers tracing the edge of my dress. It just happened. I couldn't let her take this from me. David nodded, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. You didn't just take it back, he said. You rewrote the story. We sat there for a while, the three of us, talking and laughing under the stars. Sarah told stories about her own family dramas, making us laugh until my sides hurt, and David shared how his mom had whispered to him during my toast, "That's my kind of daughter-in-law." It was a stark contrast to the cold, judgmental energy of my family's table inside. These were my people, my chosen family, the ones who saw my worth without me having to prove it. I thought about Grow Local, the platform I'd built to lift up others who felt unseen, and realized this moment was the same. I was surrounded by people who lifted me up, who celebrated me, not because of some performance, but because of who I was. As we stood to head back to the reception, David pulled me into a hug, his arms strong around me. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered, and I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness but from gratitude. Sarah linked her arm through mine, her grin infectious. "Let's go dance," she said. "This is your night." I nodded, my heart full, and we walked back to the tent, the music growing louder. The contrast was clear. Inside, my biological family was caught in Valentina's chaos. But out here, with David and Sarah, I'd found something real, something true. I was ready to step back into my wedding, not as the shadow sister, but as the woman I'd always been meant to be. The garden's quiet warmth lingered on my skin as David, Sarah, and I walked back toward the tent, the music swelling with every step. My wedding was still alive, the dance floor crowded with guests swaying under the fairy lights, but the air felt different now, lighter, like I'd shed a weight I'd carried for years. Valentina's absence left a strange calm, but I knew the fallout from my toast wasn't over. My parents' shocked faces flashed in my mind, and I braced myself for what came next. As we re-entered the tent, I felt David's hand in mine. Sarah's arm looped through my other side, and I knew I wasn't facing this alone. This moment, right here, right now, was about setting boundaries, about making it clear that Valentina's reign over my life was done. We hadn't even reached the head table when Mom approached, her face tight with a mix of worry and disapproval. Her hands were clasped in front of her, fingers twisting like they always did when she was upset. Dad trailed behind, his shoulders slumped, avoiding my eyes. "Erica," Mom said, her voice low but sharp. "We need to talk." The guests nearby pretended not to notice, but I could feel their glances, the air thick with curiosity. I straightened, my chin lifting. I wasn't the little girl who'd shrink under their disappointment anymore. "Okay," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Let's talk." We stepped to the side of the tent, near a table piled with untouched desserts, the chatter of the reception fading slightly. David stayed close, his presence steady, while Sarah hung back, her eyes sharp like she was ready to jump in if needed. Mom's lips pursed and she crossed her arms. "What you did out there was unacceptable," she said, her voice trembling. "Humiliating your sister like that on your wedding day? It was cruel." Dad nodded, finally meeting my gaze, his expression heavy. "You could have handled it privately, Erica," he said. "You didn't need to make a scene." I felt a flash of anger, hot and sharp, but I didn't let it take over. Instead, I took a slow breath, my hands steady at my sides. "A scene?" I said, my voice even. "Valentina wore a white dress to my wedding and announced a pregnancy during my reception. That was the scene, Mom. I just told the truth." Her eyes widened like she hadn't expected me to push back. Dad shifted, his hands in his pockets, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. "She's going through a lot," Mom said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "You know how sensitive she is." I laughed, a short, bitter sound that made them both flinch. "Sensitive?" I said. "She's been manipulating everyone for years, and you've let her. You've always chosen her over me." The words hung there, raw and heavy, and I saw Mom's face crumple, her hands dropping to her sides. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it, his eyes darting to the floor. I didn't stop. "I'm done letting her walk all over me," I said, "and I'm done pretending it's okay just to keep the peace." Mom's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't soften. I'd spent my life softening, and it had only made me invisible. Erica, she said, her voice breaking. We're family. You don't turn your back on family. I shook my head, my heart aching but resolute. I'm not turning my back, I said. I'm setting boundaries. Valentina doesn't get to control me anymore, and if you keep enabling her, I can't be part of that. Dad's head snapped up, his face pale. You're cutting us off? He asked, his voice hoarse. I looked at him, then at Mom, their faces a mix of shock and hurt. I'm not cutting you off, I said, my voice softer now. But things have to change. I deserve respect and I'm not going to beg for it anymore. I glanced at David, his eyes steady on mine, giving me strength. I'm starting a new life with David, I said. And I'm choosing who gets to be part of it. Mom's tears spilled over, but she didn't argue. Dad just stood there, his hands still in his pockets, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. I turned to walk away, my heart pounding but my steps sure. David fell into step beside me, his hand finding mine. You okay? He whispered. I nodded, squeezing his hand. Yeah, I said. I really am. Sarah caught up, her grin fierce. That was badass, she said, bumping my shoulder. I smiled, feeling the weight of the moment settle into something solid, something empowering. I'd drawn a line in the sand, not just with Valentina, but with my parents, with the toxic patterns that had defined my life. As we rejoined the reception, the music pulling us back to the dance floor, I felt a new kind of freedom. Not just from Valentina, but from the need to please everyone else. This was my life now, and I was going to live it on my terms. The reception had found its rhythm again. The dance floor alive with guests swaying to the music, laughter rising over the clink of glasses. I stood near the edge of the tent, David's arm around my waist, his warmth grounding me as I watched the celebration unfold. The confrontation with my parents was still raw, their hurt faces lingering in my mind, but I felt steady, like I'd finally claimed a piece of myself I'd been hiding for years. Valentina was gone, her absence a quiet victory, and my parents hadn't approached me again. I knew the fallout wasn't over, but for now I was done fighting. This moment was about looking forward, about building something new, not just with David but with the life I'd been crafting in secret. I was ready to take the strength I'd found in Grow Local and use it to redefine who I was, to reclaim my family name on my own terms. As David pulled me onto the dance floor, his hands gentle but firm, I let the music wash over me. The band was playing one of our favorite songs, a slow, soulful tune that felt like a warm embrace. I rested my head against his chest, my hands on his shoulders, and for a moment, it was just us, the world fading away. You're my hero, he murmured, his lips brushing my ear. I smiled, my heart full. You're mine, I said, and I meant it. David had always seen me, even when I couldn't see myself. Now I was starting to. When the song ended, I stepped back, my hand still in his, and caught Sarah waving me over from the dessert table. She was holding 2 plates of cake, her grin infectious. You need sugar after all that, she said, handing me a slice of chocolate cake with buttercream frosting. We sat at a nearby table, David joining us, and I took a bite, the sweetness grounding me in the moment. So, Sarah said, leaning forward, her fork poised over her plate. What's next for Erica Marshall, badass extraordinaire? I laughed, wiping a crumb from my lip. Honestly, I said, I want to keep building. I thought about Grow Local, the platform that had been my lifeline, my proof that I could create something meaningful. The deal I'd signed last week was about to launch it into something bigger, a full media platform with podcasts, videos, and stories about small businesses across the country. It wasn't just a project anymore, it was my legacy, a way to lift up others who'd felt invisible, just like I had. I'm going to pour everything into Grow Local, I said, my voice steady, not to prove anything to my family, but because it's who I am. David's eyes lit up, his hand squeezing mine. It's going to be huge, he said. You're going to change lives. Sarah nodded, her eyes bright. You already are, she said. I mean, look at what you did tonight. You stood up to Valentina, to your parents, to all of it. That's not just a win for you, it's a win for everyone who's ever felt overlooked. Her words hit me hard. Not because they were new, but because they echoed what I'd been trying to do with Grow Local all along. I'd started it to give a voice to the unheard, to shine a light on people who worked hard and got ignored. Now, I was doing that for myself too. I thought about my family name, Marshall, the one I'd always felt didn't quite belong to me. It had been Valentina's stage, my parents' pride, but never mine. Now I wanted to make it mean something else. I want the name Marshall to stand for something real, I said, almost to myself. Not drama or lies, but hard work, honesty, helping people. David nodded, his expression soft but proud. It already does, he said. Because of you. I felt a lump in my throat, not from sadness, but from the realization that I didn't need my family's approval to claim that name. I was doing it on my own terms, through every story I told, every business I lifted up. As the night went on, I danced with David, laughed with Sarah, and talked with guests who approached me, their words full of admiration, not pity. You were so brave, David's mom said, hugging me tightly. I'm so glad you're part of our family. Her words felt like a balm, a reminder that I was building a new family, one that saw me for me. By the time we cut the cake, my smile was real, not forced, and as David smeared frosting on my nose, I laughed so hard I almost cried. This was my life now, a life I was choosing, building, claiming, and as I looked out at the crowd, I knew Grow Local would be my way of carrying that forward, of making the Marshall name mean something bigger than Valentina's lies or my parents' blindness. The reception was winding down, the fairy lights casting a soft glow over the emptying dance floor as guests hugged us goodbye, their smiles warm with the kind of joy that lingers after a night of celebration. David and I stood near the head table, his arm around my shoulders, my wedding dress slightly crumpled but still feeling like a second skin. The chaos of Valentina's stunt and my public takedown felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been a few hours. My parents hadn't approached me again, their absence a quiet ache, but not a crushing one. I was surrounded by David, Sarah, and friends who'd cheered me on, and that was enough. As I leaned into David, watching the last guests wave from the garden, I felt a calm settle over me, a peace I'd never known. This moment, this reflection, was where I realized my worth wasn't tied to my family's approval. It was inside me, and it always had been. I slipped off my heels, my feet aching but my heart full, and sat on a chair near the dessert table, the scent of roses still heavy in the air. David sat beside me, loosening his tie, his eyes crinkling with that smile I'd fallen in love with. You did it, he said, his voice soft. You made this day ours. I nodded, my fingers tracing the edge of my bouquet, its petals a little wilted but still beautiful. I thought about the years I'd spent in Valentina's shadow, always trying to prove I was enough, to her, to my parents, to myself. Every time I'd swallowed my anger, every time I'd let her steal my moment, I'd thought it made me stronger, but it hadn't. It had only made me smaller, until I'd started building Grow Local, until I'd found David, until tonight, when I'd finally stood up and said, no more. I looked out at the tent, the tables scattered with empty glasses and half-eaten cake, and I thought about what I'd built. Grow Local wasn't just a platform, it was my proof that I could create something meaningful, something that lifted others up. It was my way of rewriting the story of who I was, not the invisible sister, not the peacekeeper, but Erica Marshall, someone who mattered. I thought about the deal I'd signed, the one that would launch Grow Local into something bigger, and I felt a quiet pride. I didn't need Valentina's spotlight or my parents' praise. I'd found my own light, and it was brighter than I'd ever imagined. David took my hand, his thumb brushing over my wedding ring. What are you thinking? He asked, his voice gentle. I smiled, leaning my head against his shoulder. I'm thinking I'm free, I said. Not just from Valentina, but from all of it. The need to be seen by them, the need to prove anything. I'm enough. His eyes softened, and he kissed my forehead, his lips warm against my skin. You've always been enough, he said. Now you know it too. I thought about the future, our future. David and I would build a life together, one filled with love and honesty, not drama or lies. Grow Local would grow too, reaching more people, telling more stories, making a difference. I'd keep my family at a distance, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. If they wanted to be part of my life, they'd have to meet me on my terms, not Valentina's. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of that boundary. I wasn't afraid of being alone, because I wasn't alone. I had David, Sarah, my friends, my readers, the people who saw me for me. As we stood to leave, the venue staff starting to clear the tables, I took one last look at the tent. This was where I'd reclaimed my voice, where I'd stepped out of the shadow and into my own story. I felt a quiet peace, not because everything was perfect, but because I was finally okay with myself. I didn't need Valentina's drama or my parents' approval to define me. I was Erica Marshall, and I was enough. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who tried to dim your light? I know what it's like to feel invisible, to fight for your own space in a world that overlooks you. My journey, from living in Valentina's shadow to finding my voice on my wedding day, taught me that our worth isn't in what others think of us, but in what we know about ourselves. I'd love to hear your stories. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time you took back your moment. If my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on their own terms. Keep shining, because you are enough.